If everybody can find their seats, we're going to get the striped bass board going in about 2 minutes. Welcome, everyone. This is the Atlantic Striped Bass Management Board. My name is Jim Gilmore. I'm the Administrative Commissioner for New York, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. We'll hopefully get a little quicker wrap-up than we did this morning. We're going to make a couple of, and welcome to all the fishermen from the Chesapeake region. I understand we've got quite a few guys in the room, and some of them want to make some public comments, which we'll get to in a minute. Just in terms of the agenda, what we're planning on doing, if you look at it in your briefing materials, that we're just going to go through the technical committee report. Options 5 and 6 we're not going to do today. They're going to, as Bob had described before, try to do that through mail and phone. So essentially then we'll just have other business. So with those changes to the agenda, is there any other changes before we adopt the agenda? Seeing none, we'll adopt that by consensus. Next item agenda is on the agenda is the approval of the proceedings from October 2016, which is in your briefing package. Has everyone seen those, and are there any comments or changes to those? Okay, seeing none, we will adopt those by consent. Before every meeting, we have an opportunity for the public to come up to the public microphone and speak on topics not on the agenda. There will be opportunity later if there's action items to talk about the specific motions, but right now for any topic not on the agenda, I've had 2 individuals signed up that would like to make a public comment. So, but if you have any else who would like to make a comment, please raise your hand after we're done. And please just identify your name, your affiliation for the record when you come up. And first I have Robert Brown.
Chair and members of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, thank you for letting me talk today. Prior to 1985 rockfish moratorium, we had a 12-inch minimum size, 15-pound maximum size, and we fished on the spawning ground during the spawning season. There was no quotas. It was an open fishery, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, commercial and recreational. We've came a long way since then. Today, no fishing on our spawning grounds during the spawning season. We even close our season prior to the spawning season to permit the spawning biomass to reach these grounds. We have quotas which restrict us to where many of us have gone out of business. We have a limited entry and increase the size limits of these fish. Mortality rates. Mortality between an 18 and a 20-inch rockfish, the mortality rate during the warm water season far surpasses any savings of rockfish and places a hardship on our charter fishery and recreational fishermen. It is time to go back to common sense fishery. No one wants to go back to 1985. Again, we have made a great return to the rockfish population. There is no place for micromanagement, and fishery management is not a precise science. Let common sense fishery management prevail, again permitting an 18-inch minimum size, and do not shorten the season on the charter and recreational fishermen, as it is a hardship to them. The fishing charters, recreational, are not happy not being able to catch their 2 legal fish per person and throwing so many back. And always you hear, next year they'll be big enough, but the fish start their migrate to the ocean at that time. Remember, mortality rates, and remember, to do what is best for the fish and the fishermen through a common sense management fishery plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next I have Phil Langley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's Phil Langley. I'm president of the Maryland Charter Boat Association. I sit on the Potomac River Fisheries Commission and the Maryland Sport Fish Advisory Commission. On behalf of myself and a group of charter boat captains here from Maryland, that, if you don't mind, I would like to stand and be recognized at this point, if you don't mind. I promise you these guys aren't here because they like meetings. But many of these guys who just stood experienced the 5-year moratorium from 1985 to 1990. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chair, and the board for the opportunity to speak. Like you, we have a passion for protecting the resource. We realize without the resource, our professions would not be possible. Addendum 4 was implemented in 2015 to protect the existing spawning stocks and to ensure healthy spawning stocks in the future. Prior to Addendum 4, most of the Chesapeake Bay summer harvests were on ages 3, 4, and 5 fish. At age 5, a large number of these fish enter the coastal migration. The Bay's summer resident fishery is heavily skewed towards a male fishery. Most of the females in the strong 2011 year class should have entered the coastal migration now. To comply with Addendum 4 reductions, the Bay states increased the minimum size in their summer fishery for recreational and charter anglers. These adjustments protected most of age 3 fish and left mostly age 4 and some of age 5 fish to target. We saw an abundance of fish, however, most were sublegal. Most captains I've spoken with were experiencing catch ratios of 20 to 1 in 2/3 of the Bay. That's 20 throwbacks to every fish that they could keep. With an assumed 9% mortality rate, that's equivalent to 1.8 fish lost for each legal fish harvested. This takes place in water temperatures averaging 80 degrees in the Chesapeake Bay, approximately 12 to 15 degrees warmer than the majority of the northeast coast during the summer months. We feel 9% is a conservative number during that time of year. A high number of discards has created discontent with many of our customers, to the extent that many captains have experienced a 20% reduction in trips between 2015 and 2016. This economic decline has also affected tackle shops, restaurants, marinas, convenience stores, hotels, etc., that are indirectly dependent on the Bay's fishery. Approximately 60% of Maryland's charter and recreational fisheries focus on striped bass as their primary targeted species. This is due in part to the lack of variety of species available to target in the Bay. This percentage is much higher as compared to the coast, which has a greater variety of species, providing alternative fishing options. For this reason, the economic impact is significantly different among our states, with Maryland experiencing significant burden. There are concerns that economic decline will increase in 2017. While conservation is our utmost priority and concern, we request that as options to maintain a sustainable fishery are contemplated, consideration be given to the economic health of the many small businesses that rely on the continuation of our fishery. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Langley. Are there any other comments, public comments, before we move on to the next agenda item? Seeing none, we're going to move into the review of the technical committee report, and the technical committee chair, Nicole Langell, is going to give us a presentation. Nicole?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to get through this relatively quickly for the sake of time. I'm going to be presenting the technical committee report on the tasks assigned to the TC from the Striped Bass Management Board at the last meeting in October. I'll start by giving some background of what was presented to the board at the October 2016 meeting, go over the 2 tasks assigned by the board, and for task 1, I'll go through the methods, results, and discussion, and then for task 2, present the TC recommendation. At the October 2016 Management Board meeting, the board was presented with the 2016 Striped Bass Stock Assessment Update. The update found that the stock is not overfished and overfishing is not occurring. Spawning stock biomass was estimated at 129 million pounds, which is above the threshold and below the target, and fishing mortality was estimated at 0.16, which is below the threshold and below the target of 0.18. Task 1 assigned to the TC was determine the percent liberalization in harvest that would increase fishing mortality from the 2015 terminal year estimate of 0.16 to the FMP target F of 0.18. Task 2 was to recommend a preferred data set using updated length frequency data for states to use when preparing conservation equivalency proposals for recreational regulations. For Task 1, and again, this was to look at how much we could liberalize harvest to get back up to the target, from 0.16, which was the 2015 terminal year estimate, to the target of 0.18. We projected the striped bass population starting in 2015 and going through 2017. There were 2 scenarios presented in the memo to the board. Scenario 1 used preliminary 2016 removals, a fishing mortality of 0.18 in 2017, and we estimated the total removals in 2017 under this scenario. For Scenario 2, we had a constant fishing mortality of 0.156 in 2015, and we used an F of 0.18 in both 2016 and 2017. And again, we estimated total removals in 2016 and 2017. For some results for Task 1, preliminary 2016 removals were estimated at 3.6 million fish. This is an 18% increase from 2015. And keep in mind, these are just preliminary estimates. They could increase when they become final. Fishing at F equals 0.18 in 2017 results in a harvest of roughly 3.3 million fish. And you can see that for Scenario 1 and 2, the number of fish are very close. It's roughly about 3.3 million. So our results found that total removals of 3.3 million fish in 2017 would represent a 10 to 11% increase from 2015 removals, but it would also represent a 6% decrease from the preliminary 2016 removals. And again, 2016 removals are likely an underestimate. For Task 2, we were asked to recommend a preferred data set for states to use when preparing conservation equivalency proposals for recreational regulations. And this primarily came about due to the emergence of the 2011 year class. So the TC had originally prepared a memo in 2014 that went to the board, and we recommended using 2011 to 2013 as the preferred data set. The TC met and discussed this and decided pursuing the development of a length-based projection model would be an ideal approach for length frequency data. However, in the interim, until that model can be developed, we recommend using the most 3 recent years of size frequency data for CE proposals. A state may opt to use less than 3 years if they can justify a reason for doing so. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thanks, Nicole. Questions? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report, Nicole. Did the TC look at the length frequencies from the MRIP for the 2016? Is most of that increase in landings coming from fish recruiting to the fishery? I mean, because that seems like quite a big increase in from 2015 to 2016 under the same regulations.
We did talk about this at the last meeting, and we did see a much higher proportion of age 4 or 5 fish in the length frequency data and in the harvest, in both harvest and in discards.
Dr. Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nicole, I was just curious if for the preliminary 2016 harvest estimates, if the technical committee was able to break those out by bay harvest versus coastwide harvest?
It's not broken out by bay and coastwide, but I can tell you exactly what went into the preliminary harvest. So for 2016, obviously we didn't have all of the data available yet. So we used, for 2016, waves 2 through 5. For 2015, we brought in wave 6 estimates because 2016 was not yet available. We also brought in Virginia wave 1 estimates from 2015, and this is all for recreational data, harvest and discards. And discards reflects 9% discard mortality from released fish. On the commercial side, we used 2016 preliminary numbers provided by the states. However, we substituted for New York and Virginia with 2015 numbers because 2016 was expected to be much higher than 2015. And we also used the 2015 commercial discard estimates as 2016 was not yet available.
John McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also noted that big increase in removals from 2015 to 2016, and it does make sense to me anecdotally, given what we saw along the coast with the aggregation of menhaden and the number of people taking advantage of that opportunity. But what I didn't really understand was how the projected removals for 2017 were lower than 2016. Or I believe they're even lower than 2015. And how did you come to that?
So the way we calculated sort of the task was to figure out if we were fishing at 0.18 in 2017, what kind of removals would that equivalent to? So we basically projected the population forward from 2015, which was the end of the assessment, so you have your total numbers at age in that coming out of there, and then you just project the population forward for 3 years under 2 different harvest scenarios. And one of those, so we need to know what happened in 2016 to get to 2017. So in 2016, we had these preliminary numbers, and so you take those out of the population, and then you push the population forward for another year. So, and then you apply that 0.18F to the population in 2017. And so if you're fishing at 0.18 in 2017, given the population size that we project will exist in 2017, then that's the level of removals that you can take out to get to a F of 0.18. The reason that it's lower than 2016 is that if you actually look at the value for F that would get you to 0.18 in 2016, it's lower than those preliminary 2016 removals. So basically, this is suggesting that if we did the update in 2016 with 2016 data, it would suggest that we were above the target in 2016. So we are, the harvest removals for 2017 that could take place under an F of 0.18 is slightly higher than what we saw in 2015. That is, you could go up a little bit from your 2015 numbers, but it's still lower than the 2016 numbers because the preliminary 2016 numbers, because we're anticipating that harvest has gone up that much in 2016. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'd like to say I understand that thoroughly, but I don't. We could talk offline about that, but one of the things I did hear you say was that, so F increased to above the target in 2016. That's the projection, right? And we're forecasting we'll be above target again in 2017. Is that correct?
We are forecasting that if you took the same level of removals out that you took in 2016, you would most likely be above the target in 2017. If you took we did not do any projections to project forward at the 2015 levels, which is slightly below the target, at least on paper. So if you stayed at 2015 or below, you would most likely be at or below the target. But the 2016 values would put you over.
Thanks. Okay, I think I understand that. I would just add that there's no reason to believe that we wouldn't have the same sort of fishing conditions in 2017, and I don't know why it would be lower, why removals would be lower at all, and why fishing mortality would be lower. But that's just me speaking from anecdotally.
Thanks, John. Any other question? Mike Louisi.
Hi, Jim. And thank you for asking for a question. So the difference between 2015 and 2016 is obviously something that the board members are looking at and are asking questions about. But given the comments regarding 2016 as a projection, it was stated that these are preliminary estimates, and it was also mentioned briefly through another set of questions that we're not quite sure yet what's going to happen in 2016. I would like to get the technical committee's position on which is a more reliable estimate of fishing mortality. Is it the 2015 estimate, which from what I understand to be a much more complete and thorough analysis to estimate that F, or is it the projected landings that we just don't know and they're not final yet?
So as you said, the 2015 estimates came out of that update assessment. For 2016, we are using preliminary numbers. We do expect those numbers are likely an underestimate of what total removals in 2016 will be. The technical committee did not necessarily discuss what the likelihood of being at or above the target would be in 2016. We wouldn't know that for sure without doing another update assessment. So we can't necessarily say for certain which we have more confidence in because we don't actually know where we'll be at in 2016 in terms of fishing mortality until we have those final numbers.
Follow up, Mike.
Yeah, and so just to follow up on an assessment update, it's not in the plans to do an assessment update, and from what I understand, Mr. Chairman, the next opportunity to evaluate the stock will be through the benchmark assessment that I'm being told is probably going to be, the report for that assessment will likely be towards the end of 2018, which will then extend any management change related to striped bass probably into 2019 or 2020. I just want to make sure it's clear that there is no plan right now to do a 2016 or 2017 assessment, which will give us more certain values for the 2016 F as it relates to coast-wide harvest.
That's my understanding, Mike. That's correct. Andy Shields?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. When do we think we would have the 2016 estimate or data?
Those numbers wouldn't come out until MRIP numbers are finalized, so approximately in May.
Robert Rowley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on the changes from 2015 to 16 and then the reduction in 17. Where does the progression of the female striped bass leaving Chesapeake Bay figure into all of that? How's that treated?
Because we're using a single model for the entire coast and the entire population, we don't have sex information, migration information is not incorporated into this analysis.
Okay, I think we've gone through the questions now. If you recall, this was, the TC report was brought up at the last meeting for an investigation and information for a potential action. So at this point in time, is there any action that we would like to take as a result of this? Mike Louisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first I'll start off by saying that I want to thank the board, all the members of the board, for their support over the last 18 months as we explored a deeper understanding of the effects of Addendum 4 and the regulations that were imposed on the states through that addendum. This board was willing to go forward and approve an assessment update, which was conducted, and we just received a report on the results of that assessment update, and I do appreciate that effort. I have a number of points that I'd like to make, but before I get to that, I do have an action that I'd like the board to consider today. I've passed that action on to Max, and I can read that into the record if that's the appropriate time right now, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Why don't we do that, and then we can get right to the heart of it.
Okay, so I move to initiate an addendum to the Atlantic Striped Bass Fishery Management Plan that considers a relaxation of the coast-wide commercial and recreational regulations to bring fishing mortality to the target based on the 2017 stock assessment update. And it would be my intention there to look at F as it relates to the 2016 assessment, which was below the target. And what the report today was that we could look at a 10% increase to that in harvest coast-wide. So the point there with the 2016 stock assessment is to end the discussion at the terminal year of 2015. And if I get a second, I can offer other justification for this action.
Okay, do we have a second to the motion? Rob O'Reilly. Okay, Mike, you want to go ahead and go into the detail?
Sure. Thanks for the second, Rob. So again, we want to thank you for all of your support over these last couple of years in listening to and considering actions that we were hoping would show an impact to our recreational and commercial industries in Maryland. I think it's very abundantly clear that there's a great deal of interest given our stakeholders in the audience here today in the striped bass fishery. All of you have also received a letter from Governor Larry Hogan of the state of Maryland indicating his concerns over the actions that have been taken and the implications of those actions and the economic impacts of those actions to our state. We will continue to stand behind previous comments that we've made. I think someone mentioned Groundhog Day earlier this morning. I'm not sure who it was, but we continue to want to make the point, and we stand behind previous comments that this stock is robust. This stock is not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring. We believe the stock to be in a much better condition than what would come from the assessment in the spawning stock biomass, which through retrospective analysis indicates that we are underestimating the spawning stock biomass when moving forward. I look to the objectives of Addendum 4. So a couple years ago, we took action to achieve certain objectives. One of those objectives was to protect the 2011 year class. 2011 year class has now entered into what is exploitable in Maryland, yet the 2011 year class, as many would know along the coast, many or if not most of them are leaving the Chesapeake Bay and are becoming part of the migratory stock. We believe that that objective in Addendum 4 was met, and while we've carried the burden of that objective, because as you know, the Chesapeake Bay is responsible for the majority of the striped bass along the coast, we felt we did our job achieving that objective, and we think it's time to take a different action. Now, the other objective, Addendum 4, was to reduce F to at or below the target, and based on the 2016 assessment, that's where we are. F is below the target based on the 2016 assessment. So in achieving both of the addendum's objectives, I think that it's time to consider an action that would allow for some flexibility to the states, and not every state would need to engage in that regulatory relaxation, but it would be something that could be offered to the states between now and the benchmark assessment, which is years from now. I think it's unreasonable to expect the stakeholders to, once objectives have been met in an addendum, to just hold the line until we have, for years, until management actions are considered. Now, I'll say that, economic impact is felt quite differently along the coast when management actions are taken, and individual states feel those impacts differently. The impacts to Maryland have been significant. There will be those that can argue that it's not the case, but I think that, looking out at this crowd, reading the letter from Governor Hogan, the economic impacts have been significant. And one of the reasons for those impacts to the state of Maryland is the lack of variety of other fish to target. The charter boat industry has been built around striped bass fishing. We don't have the same opportunity given the proximity of Maryland's portion of the Chesapeake Bay to the ocean. We don't have the variety to bring people in, and if striped bass, if you're not catching striped bass, you can move on to another species. It's just not available for us. And so I think that is one of the reasons why this type of action that I'm suggesting here, we as well as other states that have the same type of lack of variety, we could take advantage of that. And I'll be specific about how we could take advantage of that. It was mentioned by Captain Langley earlier that in the summer-fall fishery in our state, water temperatures warm. There are many fish that get caught and returned. We were looking at a 2-inch increase from our previous regulations that were there, that we had for 20 years. And it often takes 20 to 30 to 40, and some might even say more fish before you can catch a harvestable fish. And there's a lot of mortality that's associated with that. One of the advantages that I could see coming from the approval or through the work of this addendum would be to liberalize our summer-fall fishery to a 19-inch fish and turn a lot of that regulatory discard into harvest. That would be the intention of what we're looking at here. I'm not looking for going back to prior to the addendum, resetting the clock on quotas. We're just looking for some flexibility. We believe that it's time to make that change, and given the impacts to the state of Maryland, I hope that the board will continue to be supportive of these efforts as you have for the last 18 months as we've explored all of this. I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Let me get a show of hands. I'm assuming we're going to have a few comments on this, so I want to try to do pro-con on this. So I got Pat Kelleher, con. Ed O'Brien, are you pro or con on this? Just hang on a second before you comment. Pro. John Clark? Okay. Marty, I can figure that one out. John McMurray, I can figure that one out. Jay, you pro or con? Okay. Okay, anyone else? Rob O'Reilly? Okay. Anyone else want to come? Michelle? Okay. Okay. And Rachel? Okay. Okay. I think I got everybody. We can always add on. All right, Pat, you get the floor first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm troubled by the initiation of this motion. As I look at the agenda, after looking at the technical committee report, there's no motion of action. The state of Maryland obviously came here to initiate this action, considering the amount of charter boat fishermen that are here. The state of Maine and fishermen and charter boat operators within the state of Maine were not aware of this discussion. I think if they were, you would have had a lot of comments from them, and I certainly would have had a lot of comments from them before I came here to this meeting. In looking at the Honorable Larry Hogan's letter, frankly, I could have penned a very similar letter for my boss, Governor LePage, with just the opposite tone to remain status quo. As a former charter boat operator, full-time charter boat operator in a past life, long time ago, I can tell you that the impact to the state of Maine charter boat fleet, the economic impact, was great. For very similar reasons, we have supported for many years now a reduced mortality in reduced effort to try to build our fishery back up to even a fraction of what it was, frankly, in the 90s and 2000s. We, like the state of Maryland, don't have a lot of options to find other species and target other species. Striped bass inshore is basically it. So for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I'll be opposing this motion.
Thanks, Pat. Ed O'Brien?
Supplement the letter that Phil wrote, and certainly the governor's approach is from a socio-economic situation. I assure you that in the legislature we have similar feelings, and based upon today, that if we're successful here, I think that can settle things in our state to a degree. As I look at the captains here today, I see the sons of their fathers going out of business when we went into moratorium. Captain Green, Captain Abner, Captain Sullivan, and others. We took a real hit for 5 years while a lot of people kept fishing. We're up against the same kind of situation now with this 20-inch fish. And I hate we know these fish are leaving earlier than they were before. A 20-inch fish typically is out of here by the time we go for them now. A 19-inch fish would be helpful. We deeply feel it should be still the 18-inch fish. But we're looking for a compromise. Down in Florida, you all were patient listening to me, and it's right back here again with the same kind of a conversation. We came in with an appeal when we first went to this 14-inch fish. And needless to say, it didn't pass. Down in Florida, we really appreciated the policy committee willing to listen to us further on this subject when it came to the 20-inch fish. So I just hope that we'll keep some open minds. I know up north looks at things totally different than we do on the bay, and they certainly have a right to. But we need some help here, gentlemen. We need some help. We need this 19-inch fish. And that's a compromise. Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ed. Next, I have John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. Delaware was opposed to these very conservative reference points. We appealed Addendum 4. Because of that, it has had similar socioeconomic impacts in our state. The F is now below the target, which, once again, is an extremely conservative target. And rather than wait yet another 2-3 years before we do any liberalizing, I think it's time to start giving back some of the quota that we took away from both our recreational and commercial fishermen.
Thanks, John. Let me go. I can't read my own handwriting. I wrote it down so quick. So I had a couple other folks on this side of the table. I had Marty, Rob, Michelle, and Rachel. Was there anybody else on that side of the table that? Okay. How about? All right. Let me go to Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say up front, a lot of the charter captains that took the time to come here again, this is, I think, the third or fourth time I've seen them here in the last couple of years, also fish in Potomac River Fishery Commission jurisdictional waters. So I appreciate the effort that they made to send a message to you all that they really care, and hopefully the board members do as well. I know they do. I heard some of the speakers. Mike talked to some of the economic and technical aspects of what we're dealing with. Ed O'Brien, the economic impacts to his industry. I heard Rob ask a question regarding the female migration out of the bay and the lack of information. But I did want to say, without rehashing a lot of that, there is some information that we do know. Rugolo and Jones, colleagues that I both had an opportunity to work with when I was on the striped bass stock assessment program at DNR in the late 1980s, conducted a migration study. There isn't anything else I'm aware of. It gives us some sense. You heard Ed talk about what they observe on the water. The 2011 year class, which we sought to protect, is in its 6th year of life. The Rugolo and Jones data, to give you some estimation of what we're dealing with here, tells us that only 5.6% of the females are left in the bay in their 6th year, and 16% of the males are left, which is that's a story you've heard many times from the bay jurisdictional managers. We primarily have a male fishery that we fish on. So that gives you some numbers to work with, even though that study is a little bit older. The 2011 year class was the 4th biggest in the near 60-year history of the Maryland Juvenile Finfish Survey. And by all accounts, from everybody I've talked to, it is as advertised. It's that big. And as Mike said, I think we've protected that year class. That important year class is largely out of the bay. I've heard some of the reports in Redwood John McMurray's put up. I enjoy his writing, and John's starting to see some of that. Other people are seeing it. So it's happening. The 11-year class, as Mike said, has been protected. So that begs the question, what's coming behind the 11-year class? Well, if you haven't looked, the 12-year class was the lowest in the 60-year history of the Maryland Juvenile Finfish Survey. It was a 0.89. So that's what they've got to look forward to as these fish move out. After that is the 13-year class, which is a 5.75. That's a pretty weak year class. But we also know that these oscillations based on environmental conditions happen all through the time series. So the good news is, in 14, we have a slightly above average year class. And I think, personally, it's probably a lot better than slightly above average because 3 of the 4 systems that went into that survey were really good, and 1 tanked and dragged it down a little bit. So the 14s are probably pretty good, and the 15s are the 8th biggest. That's a good year class. So there's some relief on the horizon, but as Mike said, these guys may have some tough sledding depending on how many of those 11s are still around. We're not overfishing. Overfishing's not occurring. I mean, this board has an opportunity today to do something for these people that have reached out to you. So I'll leave it at that and listen to what other folks have to say, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Marty. Next I have John McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a few things here. First, according to the TC analysis, we could theoretically get away with a 10% increase in removals if we base it on 2015. If we base it on 2016, if I'm understanding the briefing material right, it's suggesting that we need to do a 6% reduction. Is that correct? Okay. So we should keep that in mind, for one. And as far as economic impacts and the condition of the stock itself, certainly up the coast, people suffer economic impacts from a reduction in abundance. And me personally, and so do my colleagues. So while the stock is not overfished, we're actually just above threshold. We're not even close to target. So I wouldn't claim that the stock is doing incredibly well, and it is incredibly abundant. I still think it has a ways to go. But I don't really understand how we're harping on the fact that 2015 was just below target. I mean, to me, the SSB would seem to be the more important indicator and what we should base any sort of management decision on. It seems to me like it would be way more, and I think the intent really was to wait till the 2018 benchmark and not to really change the regs after 2 years based on what the TC has told us is a statistically irrelevant difference between 0.16 and 0.18. Marty brought up the Young of the Year indices. I'd want to point out that the 10-year average is considerably lower than the prior 2 decades. And I also have a question about timing. I mean, we have to go through a full addendum process here. And it seems to me, and maybe I have this wrong, like that would overlap the benchmark. I mean, we wouldn't expect to get this done in a couple of meetings, right? It would take a little while. So I don't know why we would initiate an addendum when we're going to embark on a more thorough process to assess the stock and have more information to make better management decisions. So I have a few more things to say, but I think I'll cap it there. I don't support the motion, obviously.
Thanks, John. Rachel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's not much left to say that wasn't said already, so I would just say that the gentlemen that are here in the room today have been good stewards of this resource. They definitely feel like they have contributed their part by not only protecting the 2011 year class, but also the spawning striped bass. So with the conservative reference points that we have, the strong year class that's coming and the sex ratio that we know is different in the Bay. I would ask that you consider this, and I don't pretend that I would be able to convince you, John, either, to come over to our side, but I would ask you just to consider if you are seeing the positive effects of the work that they've put in, because they certainly have contributed to this in such a manner that they're now coming to us and asking for relief that I think that within the numbers we could do without harming the stock, and we could still move forward with this. So thank you for that consideration.
Thanks, Rachel. Jason McNamee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'll start off by saying my comments aren't meant to be callous. I also appreciate the gentlemen who've, come here today and the comments that we've heard so far. But I go back to this board tasked the technical committee to look at some projections. My guess is that was done to get an assessment of risk for making some management changes, and the feedback that we've received from the technical committee is there's too much uncertainty both in the harvest estimates and in the differential between where the terminal estimate is and the fishing mortality target is, to judge them as being different from each other. There's uncertainty in multiple aspects of all of the information, such that I don't believe there is any buffer with which to work to increase harvest, change management measures. One final point is we're focused on fishing mortality, but there's also pretty close proximity with the spawning stock biomass threshold, and the risk associated with dropping below that threshold per the addendum is pretty severe as well. And so I guess a judgment on the riskiness of initiating something like this, the risk is too high at this point with the information we have available.
Thanks, Jay. Robert Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I feel like we're in the middle of the Continental Congress sometimes, so I think debate is healthy, but I'd like to hold on to what I perceive as the facts. And the facts were given by Mike Luisi when he started off. The relevance of the 2015 terminal year versus doing, and I don't mean to step on any toes here, doing some static projections, some based on information that's not even final. I see that as a truth anyway. I also see it as a truth that in Virginia we have an area called the Northern Neck, and it has suffered terribly. Its charter fishery has become very reduced, and to the point where I'm always surprised when I'm reviewing requests for delayed entry into the commercial fishery, because that's probably not the place to go either. So there have been some pretty severe economic impacts. I can't cite striped bass as the reason that our Wachapreague charter industry became decimated. I think that started with weak fish, and then summer flounder did the rest. So it is problematic when someone asks for some flexibility and doesn't ask for his own state but offers it to the coast and says, well, who wants to avail yourselves of that situation? It's also problematic that with these projections, I still am curious. There is a migration rate, and that's not being addressed. So then you have to think, well, to get to 28 inches at least, then where are the discards and where's the harvest and when does that occur and everything else? And I think that that's sort of a weak point here as well. John Clark made a comment about the very conservative reference points, and I'd just like to say that SSB and F are linked, and SSB was our standard based on what 1995 was until it was revised to be 1.25 times higher. And some people that I respect in the stock assessment world who aren't here were shaking their heads at that point, saying, how does that happen? How do we get to that spawning stock biomass? So there's a lot here that I'm limiting myself to things that I know, not that others have given to me so I can interpret them some way different. But all in all, this is something that the Chesapeake Bay has really taken a turn down. If you look at the Virginia data, it's really not very attractive to watch what's happened over the last, it probably started with the economic downturn, but it certainly has continued with the recreational fishery. And so I think we just need to put all these comments together in our heads and take a look at what Mike Luisi has offered.
Thanks, Rob. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have the same concerns about timing that have been expressed by other board members around the table with regard to an upcoming benchmark. But I'm also very sensitive to the unique characteristics of the bay fishery, not dissimilar to the unique characteristics of the Albemarle Roanoke stock that we have in North Carolina. And I'm also sensitive to the fact that, the management regime changed significantly for the Bay States when, with the implementation of Addendum 4 and, loss of the harvest control model to be able to respond to increases in abundance. And my understanding, based on my reading of the terms of reference for the upcoming benchmark, is that this is one of those items that may be addressed as providing, the TC SAS hopes to be able to provide stock-specific reference points that would hopefully allow for some more flexibility in the management of the striped bass stocks along the Bay States. And, I guess when Jim asked me if I was speaking pro or con, and I did this because I just wanted to offer, is there not a possibility of putting forward a plan for conservation equivalency? That's a tool that we have in the toolbox here. I don't know if that is something that would work for the Bay States or any other state that, feels like they have possibly an alternative means to, meet the objectives that we're working under here. The technical committee provided some advice with regard to data to be used for conservation equivalency proposals, but also acknowledged that if there was justification for using alternative years, that states could do so. So I just throw that out as a potential compromise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Michelle. Next I have, Steve Train.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With this meeting already running, starting after it should have ended, I would like to make a motion to postpone. If I get a second, I'll explain why.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone. It's seconded by Richie White. If I remember my parliamentary procedures correctly, this is non-debatable, so this simply would be...
Till the May meeting, I should have added, has to be a time certain.
Has to be time certain to the May meeting. So now it's not debatable, so we're just going to have to take a vote on this to postpone. So let me give you 2 minutes to caucus.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
I beat you.
I got 7 points of order, so...
Similar to how we worked it out this morning, I think the timing is debatable to a motion to postpone. We can certainly debate the timing. And I'd like to make a comment to timing if we can do so.
You're right, Mike. Go ahead.
So it's been mentioned a few times about the timing of how this action would unfold. And while I would in no way expect there to be any type of fast-tracked addendum in this case, given the coast-wide nature of it. We believed that if an addendum were initiated today and we could get out to the public between the May and the August meeting of this board, that we might be able to take final action on the addendum in August, which could help cauterize the wound if we were granted some flexibility in the regulation. It could really help with our fall fishery, and it could stop the bleeding for our charter and commercial fishermen that have been the ones sacrificing for this. So timing of a postponement to the May meeting will only kick this further along, and I just fear that we won't have an opportunity in 2017 to take advantage of a relaxation in regulations if it were granted to us by the board through the addendum. So I can't support postponing this again.
Thanks, Mike. Russ, I know you want to make a comment, but right now we're just commenting on the timing. You want to comment? Okay. Anyone else want to comment on the time frame? John McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, just to Mike's comments, I'm not sure how that timeline would work. I mean, I think maybe there's an expectation like this is going to sail through, and once you start talking about a striped bass addendum, it really fires up a lot of people in my region and north, and we could expect a big turnout and a lot of aggravated people. And I don't suspect this is going to be an easy process, so I just would note that timeline seems rather ambitious, and I don't know whether I support this yet or not. I haven't really heard the rationale for it, but I would like to before we vote.
Max has got some input. Let me go to Max first, and I'll get to you, Richie.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the timeline. Mike was correct. I mean, the best case scenario is that the PDT would essentially bring a draft addendum to the board in May, and that would then get approval at that time, go out for public comment, and come back in August for final approval.
Richie?
May I comment on the rationale for my second? Is that inappropriate?
Sure.
Okay. Rationale for my second is that the public in Maryland knew of this coming and had a chance to weigh in, and the rest of the public did not. And this would be an agenda item at the May meeting, so all the public then would have the ability to give input to all the commissioners before that meeting.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for another bite at this one. To the timing, I could be wrong, but I think the meeting this morning was probably one of the more contentious meetings that we've had regarding options and addenda, and I believe that was one that carried through the course of a couple meetings, and so I would say that it's doable. It's absolutely doable. And to Mr. White's point about having an opportunity for stakeholders to be here today, well, the whole purpose of an addendum is to go out to the public and get comment back to the public for the board. Motions and actions are taken all the time without everybody being aware of those actions that are going to be happening. So I would say that the public will absolutely be able to weigh in through the process. Delaying that process is only going to delay when that public information will be available to the board.
Okay, I'm going to call the question. I think we've had good debate on it, so let me just read the motion, and we'll take a vote. Motion to postpone until the May meeting. The motion by Mr. Train and second by Mr. White. Do we need a caucus for this? Okay, 2 minutes for caucus.
Roll call.
Okay, I'm going to call the roll. I think we've had enough time to talk about this. So, Max.
Following Kirby's lead, working from north to south, Maine.
Yes.
New Hampshire.
Yes.
Massachusetts.
Yes.
Rhode Island.
Yes.
Connecticut.
No.
New York.
Null, N-U-L-L.
New Jersey.
No.
Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Delaware.
No.
Maryland.
No.
District of Columbia.
No.
Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
No.
Virginia.
No.
North Carolina.
No.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yes.
National Marine Fisheries Service.
Yes.
The vote was 7 in favor, 7 against, 1 no vote, so the motion fails for lack of a majority. So we're back to the original motion on the table. I had a couple more comments on timeout. We have to have a recount.
7-4 opposed and no tie.
No. 7-8 no, so it fails. So same result, different vote. So I had a couple of more comments left. I had, let me see, Steve, you put up the motion. Then I had Russ Allen, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very conflicted on this one. You know, we had an argument this morning and a discussion about summer flounder where every one of these discussion points was exactly the same ones we made for summer flounder. And, you know, as most people know, I usually have no problem moving forward with striped bass in order to help the Chesapeake states get what they need over time. And this is what's made it really conflicting, because if you were at our public hearing for summer flounder, we had well over 150 people in that room with the same complaints that we're talking about today. So it's a little mind-numbing for me on this one, but I can see where I would be going against my own principles if I voted against this. So I probably will be in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Russ. Where'd Richie go? Yeah, okay. Let's see. I think I'm back to Mike Louisi again. So, Mike, do you have other comments?
I'll just, to the point that was just made by Russ, you know, all morning this morning we talked about how to provide some flexibility when that flexibility is needed. And I think you've heard from me and my other colleagues in our area that we need help. And I'll leave it at that. But not only do we need help, but I think that there's opportunity for other coastal states that may be able to take advantage to some degree to what I believe is a very limited risk on a stock that is in a healthy condition and where reference points are very conservative. So I'll leave it as my last point, and I appreciate you coming back to me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mike, thanks. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I hear very clearly the pain, very clearly. But we can't science our way out of this problem. This is the wrong motion. The motion should be an amendment or an addendum to relax the targets or whatever you think it needs. I wouldn't support that. I support what we have in place. But we just heard the science do projections that say no matter what we do, we're not going to get more fish on the path we are. The only thing is we raise the target for F. And to Michelle's point, it may be conservation equivalency in the bay that gets us. From where I sit at a target of 0.18, and we're nowhere near the target SSB, we are playing in the grounds of violating the trigger of the SSB. This motion is going to have the technical committee, of which my guy is the chair, and he spends 40 hours a week working on striped bass, and he'll look at me and say, you're crazy. We're going to give you the same answer. And not that that's wrong, but I don't want to charge these folks with doing the same analysis again and getting the same answer. And so what I started off with, if we want to consider raising the F, it is conservative. It's a good F for recreational fishery. If we want to lower SSB targets, then that's, I don't know if that's an amendment or an addendum, but in my mind, that's where we're at. This is the wrong way to go, and I vote against it.
Thanks. Okay, I think we've gone through all the questions on both sides. I think we're ready for a vote on this. Let me go just to the public before we vote on it. Does anybody from the public want to comment? Okay, seeing no comments, no hands raised from the audience, we'll come back to the board. I think we'll give everybody a 3-minute caucus on this because I think we're going to need it unless there's any final shots. So I think everybody's pretty well. Okay, 3 minutes to caucus. Okay, we're ready for the vote.
Can I ask for a roll call, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. Okay, we're going to do a roll call vote on this. Go ahead, Max, when you're ready.
Maine.
No.
New Hampshire.
No.
Massachusetts.
No.
Rhode Island.
No.
Connecticut.
Yes.
New York.
Yes.
New Jersey.
Yes.
Pennsylvania.
No.
Delaware.
Yes.
Maryland.
Yes.
D.C.
Yes.
I'm sorry, District of Columbia.
Yes.
Potomac River Fisheries Commission.
Yes.
Virginia.
Yes.
North Carolina.
Null, N-U-L-L.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
No.
National Marine Fisheries Service.
No.
The motion passes 8-6 to 1 null vote. So the motion is approved. So if we're going to embark on an addendum, we're going to have to get some feedback to the plan development team, and we're going to have to work. I guess Max and the technical committee are going to have to be working, and may need some information back from the states. We may have to put together a subgroup depending upon how it is, so we're hoping we get cooperation, particularly from the Bay States on this. So, Max, you want to add anything else? Okay. Okay. I believe, as we called before, we were not going to do items 5 and 6, so we're just down to other business. The food's spoiling, so just keep that in mind if you have any. So are there any other business to come before the Striped Bass Board today? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn. Seconded by everybody. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to have lunch available for commissioners and proxies, and then we'll come back and start South Atlantic Board as soon as we can.